In the sweltering summer of 1943, within the confines of Camp Crossville, Tennessee, a German soldier, a veteran of the hard-fought North African campaign, found himself captivated by a simple yet bewildering sight. A dark, effervescent liquid fizzed in a glass bottle before him. After 2 years of surviving on meager army rations, hardtack biscuits, and a bitter ersatz coffee called ersatz, this sweet, carbonated beverage known as Coca-Cola represented something far beyond a mere drink. It was an impossibility made tangible, a small miracle of modern alchemy. He learned it could be purchased for 5 cents at the camp canteen, the very same price, the American guards casually informed him, that their own children paid with their weekly allowances using corner store vending machines. This singular experience was not an isolated incident, but a microcosm of a vast, unplanned psychological campaign unfolding across the United States that season. That summer, over 371,000 German prisoners of war, POWs, were systematically confronted with a reality that directly and profoundly contradicted the core tenets of the Nazi propaganda they had been fed for years. They had been taught to expect a weak, decadent, and resource-poor America, on the verge of internal collapse. Instead, they discovered a nation where ice cream was a routine dessert, not a rare luxury, where sweet, fizzy, soft drinks were everyday refreshments for citizens of all ages, and where chocolate bars were so commonplace that American GIs would often give them away to their captives. These simple, sugary treats, which most German children had never even tasted, began to systematically dismantle the ideological foundations of Nazism more effectively than any Allied propaganda broadcast or re-education pamphlet ever could. The undeniable mathematics of American industrial abundance were being written not in complex economic theories, but in the universal languages of sugar and carbonation, chocolate and frozen cream. This abundance revealed a productive capacity so immense that it rendered the celebrated German ethos of deprivation and sacrifice not as a noble virtue, but as a form of needless suffering born of a flawed system. What began as mere amazement at American confections would, for many, evolve into a complete and lasting psychological transformation. The end of the desert and the first taste of plenty. The surrender of the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943 flooded Allied prisoner-of-war processing systems with approximately 250,000 hardened German and Italian soldiers. These were veteran desert fighters, men who had pushed the British Eighth Army to the brink under Rommel's command. Steeled by years of Nazi indoctrination, they fully expected harsh reprisals, brutality, and starvation in American custody. Their ideological conditioning had prepared them for a merciless enemy. Instead, within mere hours of laying down their arms, they encountered their first profound shock: American K rations. To the American GIs who regularly consumed them, these field rations were a monotonous source of complaint. But to the German soldiers, who had subsisted for months on minimal and often spoiled supplies, these compact boxes were treasure troves. They contained items that seemed like luxuries from another world. Not just basic crackers, but processed cheese, hard candy, fruit bars, instant coffee, pure sugar tablets, and plentiful cigarettes. Men who had been surviving on the edge of malnutrition treated these emergency American meals as veritable feasts. This systematic policy of feeding one's enemies with superior quality food began immediately upon capture. According to military records from the North African transit camps, the U.S. Army served the surrendering Axis soldiers meals that included pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk, foodstuffs that had vanished from standard German military rations years earlier due to the crippling shortages of the Nazi war economy. The psychological impact of this policy would only be fully understood later. As one German officer later testified to the International Red Cross, "We were prepared to be starved and mistreated as prisoners. Instead, the Americans fed us better and more regularly than our own army had in the final year of the campaign. This fundamental confusion about the true nature of American resources marked the very beginning of our re-education. The Atlantic Crossing, a voyage into unfathomable abundance. The journey to the United States aboard Liberty ships served as an intensive, weeks-long course in the scale of American industrial might. These vessels, themselves symbols of a prodigious manufacturing capacity having been mass-produced at a rate of one ship every 42 hours at the peak of the program, became floating classrooms. They transported up to 30,000 prisoners monthly across the Atlantic to the mainland United States. Naval records from this period clearly indicate that the rations provided to the German prisoners aboard these ships matched, and in many cases exceeded, the standard provisions for the American crew. The daily caloric intake was approximately 3,500 calories, featuring fresh-baked bread, meat, vegetables, and ample coffee served with unlimited sugar and milk. The ship's advanced refrigeration systems, which were standard equipment on American vessels, ensured that this food remained fresh throughout the entire 2-week crossing. The most staggering demonstration of this abundance, however, came in the form of a frozen dessert. Multiple documented accounts, including the ship's log from the USS General M.B. Stewart in July 1943, confirmed that ice cream was served to the German prisoners on several occasions during the Atlantic crossing. The log specifically notes that ice cream was served to the POWs on the 4th of July, produced by the ship's own ice cream maker, which could churn out 10-gallon batches. For men who had not seen or tasted ice cream since before the war began, the experience of being served this frozen luxury in the middle of a war zone, on a troop ship in the vastness of the ocean, defied all logic and comprehension. It was their first direct encounter with a society that possessed such a massive surplus of resources that it could afford such frivolities for its enemies in the midst of a global conflict. First impressions of the impossible. Homeland. When the ships finally docked at American ports like Norfolk, Virginia, and Newport News, the German POWs stepped into a world that Nazi propaganda had declared a physical and economic impossibility. The sheer scale of the Norfolk Naval Base, sprawling over 4,300 acres with its endless piers and bustling cranes, handled more cargo in a single day than major German ports could manage in an entire week. This was not the image of a weak nation. At the port exchanges, the shops for dock workers and military personnel, the prisoners caught their first glimpse of fully stocked American consumer society. The shelves were laden with candy bars from legendary manufacturers like Hershey, Mars, and Nestlé. Military procurement records from 1943 show these exchanges routinely stocked dozens of different candy varieties, all sold at standard pre-war prices. 5 cents for most chocolate bars, the identical price charged in every small town and big city across the continent. The journey inland by train provided yet another layer of education. Expecting to be transported in the same brutal cattle cars used for military transport in Europe, the Germans were instead loaded into proper passenger coaches. The dining cars on these trains served full meals to both guards and prisoners alike. Preserved menus from July 1943 list items such as fried chicken, fresh vegetables, pie, and coffee. The prisoners slowly came to understand that this was not special treatment arranged for their benefit. It was the standard, everyday service for American rail travel. The very infrastructure of the nation, even under the strains of war, operated at a level of comfort and efficiency that was unimaginable in Germany. Life in the camps, the architecture of abundance. The permanent prison camp system constructed across the United States was designed to exceed the requirements of the Geneva Convention, and it did so by a wide margin. Camps like the one in Crossville, Tennessee, were typical of the larger facilities, featuring electric lighting, running hot water, flush toilets, and well-heated barracks. But while the physical conditions were impressive, it was the camp exchanges, the post-exchange (PX) stores that delivered the most profound psychological impact. According to U.S. Army quartermaster records, these camp canteens were stocked with a staggering array of goods that were either unavailable or strictly rationed in Germany. Multiple brands of soft drinks, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, various candy bars and other confections, ice cream, where refrigeration was available, cigarettes and tobacco products, fresh fruit and snacks, even beer with 3.2% alcohol content. The economic mechanism was equally revealing. Prisoners were paid for their labor, starting at 80 cents per day and later raised to $1. With candy bars and bottles of Coca-Cola priced at a nickel, a single day's wage could purchase 16 of these coveted items. This was an abundance beyond German imagination. In their homeland, such products, if available at all, required special connections or exorbitant sums on the black market. Coca-Cola, the carbonated symbol of industrial democracy. Among all the American products, Coca-Cola emerged as the most potent symbol of this new reality. The Coca-Cola Company's wartime production reached almost mythical levels. Company archives show an astonishing 5 billion bottles produced in 1943 alone. The company had committed to providing 5-cent Coca-Cola to every American serviceman anywhere in the world, a logistical undertaking that required unprecedented coordination and production capacity. The German prisoners discovered that this singular soft drink, which most had never encountered before their capture, was utterly ubiquitous in American life. Every camp received regular deliveries. Historical records from the Coca-Cola archives confirm that many camps received weekly shipments of 200 to 300 cases, each containing 24 bottles. Camp Hearn in Texas, for example, consumed approximately 7,000 bottles every week during the summer of 1943. When prisoners were assigned to work details outside the camps, they observed Coca-Cola coolers and vending machines everywhere, in gas stations, factories, and schools. They saw Americans of all ages, classes, and backgrounds drinking it casually, often discarding half-finished bottles without a second thought. This standardization was particularly astounding to the technically minded German prisoners. A bottle of Coca-Cola tasted exactly the same whether it was consumed in a camp in Maine or one in Texas. This feat of consistent quality control and nationwide distribution was something that German industry, for all its touted efficiency, had never achieved for a consumer product. The syrup concentrate, manufactured in a central facility in Atlanta and distributed to a network of local bottling plants, represented an industrial coordination and democratic accessibility that directly challenged Nazi assumptions about American chaos and disorganization. Ice cream, the frozen testament to American priorities. The regular appearance of ice cream in the American prison camps seemed like the most impossible luxury of all to men who hadn't seen it since before the war. Yet U.S. Army records confirm that ice cream was regularly served in camps with adequate refrigeration, especially during the summer months. The American military command considered ice cream not a frivolity, but an essential component of morale, so important that the U.S. Navy even built specialized, self-contained ice cream ships to serve the Pacific Fleet. At camps like Camp Shelby, Mississippi, the 4th of July celebration in 1943 included ice cream made on site. The prisoners watched in fascination as American guards and kitchen staff used hand-cranked freezers, ice, salt, cream, sugar, and flavorings to produce gallons of the frozen dessert. The casual, almost wasteful use of such scarce resources, precious ice in the heat of July, cream and sugar used not for sustenance but for entertainment food, demonstrated a set of national priorities that Germans simply could not fathom. By 1944, many camps had graduated to electric ice cream makers. The variety available, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, butter pecan, often exceeded what the finest German ice cream parlors had offered in peacetime. Prisoners could purchase ice cream bars for a dime, ice cream sandwiches for the same price, or cups of various flavors. Army procurement records show that larger camps routinely ordered 50 to 100 gallons of ice cream weekly during the summer. Sugar, the sweetheart of the contrast. The unrestricted consumption of sugar in the camps delivered a particularly powerful message. In Germany, sugar was one of the most strictly rationed commodities, with civilians receiving a meager 280 grams per month when it was available at all. In the American camps, refined sugar sat in open bowls on the mess hall tables, available for unlimited use with coffee, cereal, or for any other purpose. Quartermaster records from 1943 to 1945 show that camps routinely received 100-pound bags of sugar every week. The camp bakeries used it liberally, producing cakes, cookies, and pies that appeared regularly on the menu. One documented incident from Camp Aliceville, Alabama, in August 1943, perfectly illustrates this contrast. During a period of intense humidity, several hundred pounds of granulated sugar hardened into a solid mass, making it difficult to use. Rather than going through the effort to steam it and break it down for recovery, as any German would have been compelled to do, the American kitchen staff simply discarded the entire lot and ordered a replacement shipment from their suppliers. German prisoners working in the kitchen were reportedly visibly distressed by this act of casual waste, which to them represented an almost sinful disregard for precious resources. Chocolate, Thanksgiving, and civilian kindness. The patterns of American chocolate consumption further revealed a society of democratic abundance. Major manufacturers like Hershey, Mars, and Nestlé produced millions of chocolate bars every month, despite wartime restrictions. The U.S. military alone purchased 380 million pounds of chocolate products during the war years. Prison camp exchanges were consistently stocked with multiple varieties, and the monthly Red Cross packages distributed to prisoners supplemented their rations with additional chocolate bars, instant coffee, processed cheese, and cigarettes. Luxury items that exceeded what German civilians received as their basic rations. The American holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas served as powerful, concentrated lessons in national character and capacity. In November 1943, all German POW camps served a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, complete with roast turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. The sheer logistics of providing this identical, lavish meal simultaneously to hundreds of thousands of prisoners and millions of American servicemen across the globe was a staggering demonstration of organizational power. The fact that enemy prisoners received the same celebratory meal as the soldiers fighting against them emphasized an equality of treatment that fundamentally contradicted the Nazi ideology of racial hierarchy. Christmas 1943 brought an even more profound shock. Unexpected generosity from American civilians. Church groups, civic organizations like the American Friends Service Committee, which distributed 50,000 Christmas packages to enemy POWs, and private individuals sent packages to the camps. These parcels contained homemade cookies, candy, toiletries, games, books, and cigarettes. In towns like Tonkawa, Oklahoma, and Hearne, Texas, local residents brought homemade treats directly to the camps for the German prisoners. This voluntary civilian kindness toward their nation's enemies, while their own sons and husbands were fighting and dying against Germany, challenged the very core of Nazi ideology. It demonstrated a national strength so profound that it could afford mercy instead of vengeance. Witnessing the machine of abundance firsthand. As the war progressed and labor shortages in the U.S. intensified, tens of thousands of German POWs were assigned to work details outside the camps, primarily in agriculture and food processing. This gave them an intimate, ground-level view of the American food production machine. In Michigan orchards, they picked vast quantities of cherries destined not for basic nourishment, but for maraschino production. Those bright red garnishes that would top ice cream sundaes. The volume was staggering. Single orchards would produce tons of fruit solely for decorative purposes. Working in canneries, they observed rigorous quality control that led to the rejection of perfectly edible fruit for minor imperfections in size or appearance. Records from companies like Del Monte show that up to 15% of fruit was rejected for canning and typically diverted to animal feed, a level of plenty that allowed for such selective waste. Prisoners assigned to sugar beet farms and processing plants in Colorado and Nebraska witnessed agricultural mechanization on a scale beyond German achievement. Single American farms often produced more sugar beets than entire regions in Germany. They came to understand that the annual American sugar production from both cane and beets reached approximately 7 million tons, a figure that finally explained the casual, unrestricted abundance of sugar they witnessed in the camps. Some prisoners working near schools witnessed the early iterations of organized school lunch programs where children received hot meals including milk, protein, and vegetables. The daily delivery of fresh milk to thousands of schools was a logistical feat that Germany could not match even for its military supply chains. The very concept of children being able to purchase ice cream at their school cafeteria while German children faced increasing hunger created a deep and lasting impression. For those in minimum security camps, occasional trips to American diners under guard provided another lesson. These humble restaurants offered menus that would have been considered elite fare in pre-war Germany, yet they were available to anyone with a few coins. A factory worker and a bank president sat side by side on adjacent stools, served the same food by the same waitress for the same price. This everyday democracy of consumption stood in stark contrast to the rigid social stratification of German society. The statistical irrefutability and the final blow. As the prisoners gained access to American magazines and newspapers, they discovered published production statistics that dwarfed anything Germany had ever achieved, even in peacetime. The numbers for 1944 spoke for themselves. American production, sugar, George 7 million tons. Chocolate, military only, 380 million pounds. Coca-Cola, 1943, 5 billion bottles. Ice cream, over 500 million gallons. Milk, 119 billion pounds. German civilian rations, same period. Sugar, 280 euro monthly, when available. Chocolate, a military priority, virtually unavailable to civilians. Soft drinks, minimal production. Ice cream, non-existent. Milk, severely rationed. These were not state secrets. They were openly published figures that demonstrated America's wartime production had surpassed Germany's peacetime peaks. By late 1944, a remarkable reversal began. German POWs, using their camp wages, started sending food packages to their starving families in Germany. International Red Cross records confirm that German prisoners in America sent approximately 11 million parcels to Germany during their captivity, most filled with American chocolate, coffee, and canned goods. The psychological impact on German families, receiving life-saving abundance from their imprisoned sons and husbands while they starved in a free Germany, delivered a devastating blow to the credibility of the Nazi regime. The final crushing demonstration came in the spring of 1945. As American forces advanced into Germany, newsreels shown in the camps depicted GIs distributing chocolate bars and chewing gum to emaciated German children. The joy on those children's faces at receiving simple candy that their own government could not provide completed the ideological demolition. The contrast was absolute. American soldiers, in the midst of combat in enemy territory, carried enough surplus candy to give away, while the German state that had promised them a 1,000-year Reich could only deliver ruin and starvation. Subsequent films showing the liberation of concentration camps, with American troops sharing their rations with skeletal survivors, provided a horrifying moral contrast, demonstrating a humanity that the regime they had served utterly lacked. The return home and the legacy of abundance. Between 1945 and 1946, the German POWs were repatriated to a physically and morally destroyed homeland. Many returned significantly healthier and heavier than when they were captured, a stark contrast to their families and countrymen who had been weakened and emaciated by years of severe deprivation. This physical evidence of their well-being in American captivity was undeniable. Many brought with them their final Red Cross packages, the contents of which, Hershey bars, instant coffee, canned meat, became priceless family treasures in a land of absolute scarcity. These former POWs became unexpected, yet crucial, advocates for the post-war order. They had witnessed firsthand that American abundance was not a zero-sum game. It was generated through productivity and freedom, not conquest and plunder. Their testimony that the Americans were not only capable of rebuilding their enemies, but were willing to do so, significantly influenced German acceptance of the Marshall Plan. They carried back the mental model that true power came from creative capacity, not destructive force. Many of these men went on to play important roles in the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle of the 1950s. They applied the lessons they had learned in the camps about mass production, quality standardization, efficient distribution, and the political importance of creating consumer abundance for ordinary citizens. The introduction of American-style supermarkets, the resurgence of brands like Coca-Cola, which returned to West Germany in 1949, and the democratization of luxuries like ice cream were all championed by men who had first encountered these concepts as prisoners of war. In numerous post-war interviews and memoirs, these former soldiers consistently identified their encounter with American food abundance as the single most transformative experience of their captivity. A former Afrika Korps officer stated in a 1975 interview, "We went to war expecting to defeat a weak, divided America. Instead, we found a nation that could afford to give ice cream to its enemies. That was the moment we understood we had lost more than a war. We had lost our entire worldview." Another veteran recalled in a 1985 documentary, "My first Coca-Cola was like drinking the future. It was sweet, fizzy, completely unnecessary for survival, and available to anyone for 5 cents. In that one bottle was contained everything Nazi Germany was not: abundant, democratic, and joyful." Historians like Arnold Kramer, the leading scholar on this subject, have concluded that this exposure to casual American plenty accomplished what formal re-education programs could not: the complete demolition of the Nazi myth of racial and cultural superiority. The program succeeded precisely because it was not propaganda. It was simple, observable, and tangible reality. The prisoners saw a society functioning at peak productivity while treating its defeated enemies with a dignity and generosity that defied their ideological conditioning. The story of the German POWs and American food abundance is, ultimately, history's most unusual victory. It was a war won in part through generosity, an ideology defeated by ice cream, a worldview shattered by the fizz of a soft drink. These men experienced a transformation not through punishment and deprivation, but through demonstration and plenty. They arrived in America as believers in German superiority and American weakness. They left as witnesses to the fact that true strength springs from the ability to create so much that abundance can be shared even with one's foes. The society that could casually sell Coca-Cola to its prisoners for a nickel possessed a power far greater than mere military might. The ice cream sundae, with its layers of ice cream, syrup, whipped cream, and a cherry on top, became a perfect metaphor for this reality. Each component a luxury, their combination an impossible dream for most Germans, yet it was routine and accessible in America. They had tasted democracy, and it was sweet. They had learned that America's ultimate secret weapon was not a bomb or a tank, but the industrial and agricultural capacity to give ice cream to its enemies on a hot summer day. In the end, the bottles of Coca-Cola and dishes of ice cream served in those camps achieved what armies alone cannot: the complete transformation of the human heart and mind. These men, who once could not believe such abundance existed, became its most powerful ambassadors, carrying home the indelible truth that freedom fizzes like carbonation and democracy tastes like chocolate.